The last morning I saw my mother. I was 6 years old the last time I saw my mother. At least, that's what I believed for the next 20 years. Some memories fade with time. Faces become blurry. Voices disappear. Small details vanish completely. But there are certain moments the human mind refuses to let go of. I still remember the smell of fresh pancakes that morning. I remember standing on a chair beside the kitchen counter because I wanted to help crack the eggs. I remember my father pretending not to notice when I stole pieces of chocolate before breakfast. And I remember my mother laughing. It wasn't an ordinary laugh. It was the kind that filled the entire house. The kind that made even bad days seem impossible. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder if life gives us one perfect morning before everything changes forever. Because if someone had told 6-year-old me that this would be the last normal day of my childhood, I never would have believed them. Our house wasn't large. It sat at the end of a quiet suburban street lined with maple trees that turned bright orange every autumn. My father worked as an electrician. My mother taught music at the local elementary school. Neither of them earned much money. But somehow they always made our little home feel rich. Not with expensive furniture. Not with luxury. But with warmth. Every Friday evening we ordered pizza. Every Saturday morning we cleaned the house together. Every Sunday afternoon we drove to the lake just outside town where my parents would sit on an old wooden bench while I chased ducks across the grass. It wasn't exciting. It wasn't extraordinary. It was simply home. And to a 6-year-old boy, home felt permanent. Children believe their parents know everything. That adults can solve every problem. That nothing truly terrible can happen. I believed that too. Until one Thursday morning in October. The weather forecast had predicted rain. Gray clouds covered the sky before sunrise. My mother was already dressed for work when I wandered downstairs rubbing my eyes. She smiled the moment she saw me. "You're awake early today." "I had a bad dream," I mumbled. She knelt beside me. "What happened?" "I dreamed you got lost." She brushed my hair back with her fingers and smiled. "I always find my way home." At the time, those words meant nothing. Today, I can still hear them as clearly as if she had spoken them this morning. Breakfast was unusually quiet. My father kept checking the clock. He had an emergency repair job across town. My mother had promised another teacher she would stop by the music store before school to pick up sheet music for an upcoming concert. Nothing seemed unusual. People make small changes to their routine every day. No one pays attention to them. Not until afterward. Before leaving, she kissed my forehead. Then she kissed my father. She grabbed her brown leather handbag from the hallway table. It was old. The strap had been stitched together twice. I remember because I had asked for a new backpack the week before, and she laughed. "This old bag has survived longer than you have." She opened the front door. Cold autumn air rushed inside. She turned around one last time. "I'll be home before dinner." Then she walked toward her blue sedan parked along the curb. She waved through the windshield. And drove away. That was the last time anyone in our family saw her. When 3 o'clock came, my father wasn't worried. Traffic happened. Meetings ran late. Teachers stayed after school. At 4 o'clock, he called her cell phone. No answer. At 5. He called the school. She had never arrived. The music store confirmed she had never picked up the order either. By 6 o'clock, dinner sat untouched on the kitchen table. The pancakes from breakfast suddenly felt like they had happened years ago. Around 7 that evening, my father called the police. At first, the officer sounded calm. "She's probably delayed. It happens all the time. Wait until tomorrow morning." But my father refused. My wife would never disappear without calling. Something in his voice must have convinced them. An officer arrived less than 30 minutes later. He asked questions. What was she wearing? Did she have enemies? Had the two of them argued recently? Was she under stress? Did she ever mention wanting to leave? My father answered every question with the same growing confusion. No. 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 None of it made sense. The search began before sunrise the next morning. Police checked hospitals, traffic cameras, hotels, parking lots, friends, relatives, co-workers. Nothing. Her bank account remained untouched. Her phone stopped transmitting before noon the previous day. There were no credit card purchases. No text messages. No ransom demands. No goodbye letter. It was as though she had vanished into thin air. News stations picked up the story within days. Her smiling school photograph appeared on television. Missing local teacher. Volunteers searched nearby forests. Divers checked lakes. Dogs followed scents that ended abruptly near a highway entrance. Then. Nothing. Weeks became months. Months became years. New cases replaced old headlines. People stopped asking questions. Life moved on. Except ours never did. My father refused to remove her belongings. Her winter coat remained hanging beside the front door. Her favorite coffee mug stayed inside the kitchen cabinet. Every birthday. Every Christmas. Every anniversary. He placed a fresh bouquet of white lilies beside her framed photograph. He never said she was dead. He never said she had abandoned us. Whenever I asked where she was, he always gave the same answer. I don't know. As a child, I accepted that. As a teenager, I stopped believing him. Because 20 years is a long time. Too long. Eventually, I convinced myself of something far easier to understand. She had left us. Maybe she found another family. Maybe she didn't want to be a mother anymore. Maybe everyone else had simply been too kind to admit it. Believing she had chosen to leave hurt. But somehow, it hurt less than believing she had simply disappeared without a trace. My father died when I was 23. A heart attack. Quick. Unexpected. The funeral was small. Just a few relatives. Neighbors. Former co-workers. After everyone left, I stayed behind in the empty house. For the first time in my life. It felt completely silent. No laughter. No music. No footsteps. Just memories. I spent the next several weeks sorting through decades of accumulated belongings. Old tax records. Family photographs. Boxes filled with birthday cards. Receipts. Tools. Everything my father had quietly collected over a lifetime. Then, one rainy afternoon, someone knocked on the front door. I assumed it was another neighbor bringing food. I opened it without thinking. An elderly woman stood there. Her hair had turned almost completely gray. Her face carried deep lines that spoke of years I couldn't imagine. She looked exhausted. Nervous. As though she had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. For several long seconds. Neither of us spoke. Then she looked directly into my eyes. Tears began rolling down her cheeks. And in a voice that barely rose above a whisper, she said the words that shattered everything I believed about my life. Daniel. I'm your mother. The woman at my door. The first thing I noticed wasn't her face. It was her eyes. They were the exact same shade of green as mine. Growing up, people constantly told me I had my mother's eyes. I always smiled politely. The truth was, I couldn't remember what my mother's eyes looked like anymore. 20 years is a long time. Long enough for memories to become guesses. Long enough for photographs to replace reality. Long enough to convince yourself that the person you miss never truly existed. Yet standing in front of me was a woman whose eyes looked painfully familiar. Still, familiar wasn't enough. I stared at her without saying a word. Rain dripped from the edge of the porch roof. She stood there completely soaked, holding an old canvas bag with both hands as if letting go might cause her to disappear again. Finally, I spoke. "Who are you?" She swallowed. "My name is Sarah." The name hit me like a punch. Sarah. My mother's name. But names could be copied. Memories could be invented. People lied. 20 years changes everything. You have the wrong house. I started closing the door. Before it shut completely, she whispered something that froze me in place. "You used to hide under the kitchen table every time there was thunder." My hand stopped. "What? You thought the table could protect you?" I slowly looked back at her. "When you were 4, you refused to eat carrots unless your father pretended they were dinosaur food." A chill ran through my body. Very few people could know that. Those weren't stories anyone would tell strangers. I opened the door again. "Who told you that?" "No one." "Then how do you know?" A tear rolled down her cheek. "Because I was there." Silence. Neither of us moved. I wanted to tell myself this was some elaborate scam. Someone trying to exploit an old missing person case. Someone who had researched my family. But something deep inside me whispered a terrifying possibility. What if she was telling the truth? I stepped aside. "You have 5 minutes." She nodded. "That's more than I expected." She walked inside slowly. Almost carefully. As though every step carried 20 years of fear. The house hadn't changed very much. The wallpaper was newer. The furniture had been replaced. But the layout remained exactly the same. She stopped in the hallway. Her fingers gently brushed the old wooden staircase. They never fixed that scratch. I looked. Halfway up the railing was a long mark. I remembered making it with a toy truck when I was little. No one else would have noticed it. She smiled through tears. "You cried for an hour because you thought your father would be angry." I didn't answer. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. "If you're really my mother, where have you been?" She closed her eyes. "I'll tell you. But not all at once." That answer irritated me immediately. "No. You don't get to disappear for 20 years and ask for patience. I deserve the truth. Right now." She lowered her head. "I know. But if I tell you everything at once, you won't believe me." I barely believe it myself. I crossed my arms. "Start with something simple." She nodded. "When you were 6. You broke your left arm falling off the swing." I interrupted. "No. My right arm." She smiled softly. "You always say your right arm. But it was your left. You only think it was your right because the X-ray was hung backwards." I froze. That was true. I remembered asking my father years later why the hospital photo looked wrong. He laughed and said they had accidentally displayed it backwards. I had never told anyone else. She slowly reached into her bag. "I brought something." Immediately my heart raced. She carefully removed a faded stuffed rabbit. One ear was missing. Its fur had almost completely worn away. I hadn't seen it since childhood. "Benny." The word escaped before I could stop it. I took one step forward. Where did you get that? You refused to sleep without him. When I tucked you into bed, you always made me kiss both ears. She smiled sadly. I only kissed one once. You cried until I kissed the other. Memories flooded back so suddenly that I almost lost my balance. I hadn't thought about Benny in nearly 20 years. I thought he'd been lost during one of our moves. My father had searched everywhere. We never found him. Until now. I sat down. Not because I trusted her. Because my legs suddenly didn't feel strong enough to hold me. She remained standing. Almost as if she believed she hadn't earned the right to sit inside this house. After several minutes, I finally asked. What happened? She looked toward the family photographs lining the wall. There was one of my father holding me on his shoulders. One of us fishing. One taken the day I graduated college. There wasn't a single recent photograph of her. Her life had stopped inside this house 20 years ago. I left home that morning. I never made it to the music store. I never made it to school. I leaned forward. What do you mean? She took a deep breath. There was a black SUV behind me. I noticed it after only a few minutes. I thought it was a coincidence. It wasn't. My pulse quickened. They followed you? She nodded. I stopped at a red light. The driver behind me got out. There were two men. I thought they wanted directions. They opened my door. And after that. She stopped speaking. Her breathing became uneven. As if the memory itself hurt. I waited. She tried again. I remember someone covering my mouth. I remember struggling. I remember screaming. And then. Nothing. The room became completely silent. I searched her face for any sign she was lying. But there wasn't confidence. There wasn't calculation. There was only fear. Old fear. The kind that never truly leaves. Still. My mind fought against the story. If that's true. Why didn't anyone find you? I tried. She whispered. I tried more times than you can imagine. Before I could ask another question. There was another knock at the door. Both of us looked toward the entrance. A young police officer stood outside. He had probably seen an unfamiliar vehicle parked in front of the house. Or maybe a concerned neighbor had called. Either way. The timing couldn't have been worse. I opened the door. Can I help you? The officer glanced past me. His eyes landed on the elderly woman. Then he looked back at me. Sir. We received a report. Is everything all right here? Before I could answer. The woman quietly spoke behind me. I think. It's finally time someone reopened my missing persons case. The officer stared at her in confusion. Then slowly asked the question neither of us was prepared to hear. Can I have your name? She looked directly at him. Took one slow breath. And answered. My name is Sarah Carter. I disappeared 20 years ago. The officer's expression changed instantly. He knew the name. Because even after all these years, some cases are never truly forgotten. 20 years of silence. The police station looked almost exactly as I remembered. The same faded brick walls. The same flag outside. The same narrow hallway lined with photographs of former chiefs. Only this time. I wasn't there as the frightened little boy whose mother had disappeared. I was 26 years old. And I was walking beside the woman who claimed to be my mother. Neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt heavier than words. Inside, everything changed the moment she gave her name. Sarah Carter. The desk officer froze. He looked at his computer. Then back at her. Excuse me. My name is Sarah Carter. I was reported missing on October 14th. She paused. 20 years ago. The officer didn't laugh. He didn't accuse her of lying. Instead, he slowly stood. I'll need to call Detective Harris. 20 minutes later, we sat inside a small interview room. Detective Harris entered carrying an old cardboard archive box. Dust covered the lid. He placed it carefully on the table. Across the side, written in faded black marker, were 6 words. Missing person, Sarah Carter. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't a story anymore. Someone had actually kept her file. For 20 years. The detective looked at her quietly. I've been with the department for 24 years. I remember this case. You were one of the few people we never stopped wondering about. He opened the box. Inside were photographs. Maps. Witness statements. Search reports. Old newspaper clippings. There was even a photograph of me sitting on my father's shoulders during one of the volunteer searches. I had no memory of it. My mother reached toward the picture. Her fingers stopped just above it. She didn't touch it. I never knew they searched that long. Her voice cracked. I always imagined. They stopped after a few weeks. The detective shook his head. Your husband came here almost every month for 5 years. He never believed you left voluntarily. I looked down. Dad never told me that. Not once. The detective folded his hands. If we're reopening this case, I need you to tell me everything. She nodded. Then, for the first time in 20 years, she told her story. I remember driving toward the music store. It was raining. I noticed a black SUV behind me. It stayed behind every time I changed lanes. I thought it was strange. But I wasn't afraid. She closed her eyes. I stopped at a red light. Someone knocked on my window. I rolled it down just a little. They said one of my tires looked flat. I opened the door. Her breathing became uneven. They grabbed me. The room fell silent. I screamed. I fought. There were 2 men. They forced me into the SUV. I remember someone injecting something into my arm. Everything became blurry. When I woke up, I wasn't in my car anymore. She stopped. The detective didn't interrupt. Neither did I. Finally she continued. I was inside a small cabin. There were bars on the windows. The doors stayed locked. I had no idea where I was. My stomach tightened. The detective quietly asked. Did they ever tell you why? She nodded slowly. They thought I was someone else. I looked at her. What? They were supposed to kidnap another woman. Someone connected to organized crime. They realized the mistake. But instead of letting me go, they decided I knew too much. The detective remained completely expressionless. But I noticed him writing much faster. They moved me several times. Different houses. Different towns. They never stayed anywhere very long. They took my driver's license. My phone. My wedding ring. My purse. My life. I whispered. Why didn't you escape? She looked at me. I tried. The first attempt happened 6 months later. One of the men forgot to lock a back door. She ran. Barefoot. Through the woods. For nearly 2 hours. Until they found her. They caught me before I reached the road. Her voice became almost emotionless. As punishment. They moved me somewhere much farther away. The second attempt came 3 years later. She convinced one of the captors that she needed medical treatment. At the clinic she slipped into a restroom and tried climbing through a window. A nurse saw her. Before she could explain anything, the men were already inside. They told everyone I suffered from severe mental illness. No one questioned them. They smiled. They apologized. They thanked the staff. And they took me away again. I couldn't stop staring at her. Every sentence made less sense than the last. Not because it sounded impossible. Because I couldn't imagine living through it. For 20 years. Every morning she woke up believing today might be the day she escaped. Every night. She went to sleep disappointed. The detective finally asked the question sitting in everyone's mind. How did you get out? For the first time since entering the room. She smiled. A tiny smile. Because they grew old. We looked at her silently. The two men who kidnapped me. They weren't young anymore. One died. The other became sick. They argued constantly. They trusted me too much. They thought I'd stop trying. She looked down at her hands. They were wrong. One winter morning. The surviving captor collapsed inside the kitchen. A stroke. He couldn't move. His phone lay on the floor beside him. For nearly a minute. She simply stared at it. After 20 years. Freedom was less than 3 steps away. She picked it up. Locked. Face recognition. She held it in front of him. The phone unlocked. She called emergency services. Then. Instead of waiting. She ran. Again. This time. No one followed. She reached the nearest road. A truck driver stopped. He offered help. She asked only one question. What city is this? When he answered. She began crying. She had never even heard of the town. She was hundreds of miles from home. The detective leaned forward. Why didn't you contact your family immediately? The room became silent again. She looked directly at me. I tried. I didn't know your father's phone number anymore. I couldn't remember the address. I hadn't seen a newspaper in years. I didn't even know if either of you were still alive. She lowered her head. The police had to confirm my identity first. They thought I might be confused. They ran fingerprints. They contacted old records. It took weeks. I believed her. Not because every detail had been proven. Not because the story was easy to accept. But because no one could fake that kind of pain. No one could invent 20 years of grief that lived inside someone's eyes. Still. One question remained. The question that had haunted me since she first appeared at my door. If you were finally free. I asked quietly. Why didn't you come sooner? Her expression changed. Tears filled her eyes again. She looked at me with more guilt than I had ever seen on another human being. Then she whispered. Because before I came looking for you, I found out what happened to your father. The truth my father took to his grave. For a long moment. Neither of us spoke. The detective quietly closed his notebook. Outside the interview room, officers walked through the hallway, phones rang, printers hummed. Life continued. But inside that small room, time had stopped. My mother's hands trembled as she wiped away another tear. She looked exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone who had spent 20 years carrying a weight that had finally become too heavy. I swallowed. What happened to my father? She stared at the table. I found out he died. I found his obituary online. Her voice cracked. It was 3 weeks after I escaped. I didn't know he had been gone for almost 3 years. My chest tightened. He waited for you. She nodded. I know. I read every article I could find. I saw the photographs from the funeral. I saw yours. I saw how old you become. She closed her eyes. And I realized. I had missed your entire life. The detective quietly left the room, giving us privacy. For several minutes neither of us moved. Finally I asked the question I had carried since childhood. Did you ever stop thinking about us? She looked at me as if I had asked whether she had ever stopped breathing. Not for one single day. I counted birthdays. I celebrated every Christmas alone. Every October 14th. I imagined what you looked like. When I couldn't remember your face anymore. I started talking to the memory instead. She smiled sadly. I used to tell myself. Daniel is probably taller than me now. Then a few years later. He's probably learning to drive. Later. Maybe he's graduating. I invented your life because I wasn't there to watch it. I felt anger rising inside me. Not toward her. Toward time. Toward fate. Toward every year that had been stolen from both of us. You missed everything. My first day of middle school. My graduation. My first apartment. My first heartbreak. My father's funeral. I needed you. She covered her mouth as tears streamed down her face. I know. I know. I'm so sorry. For the first time in 20 years. I cried in front of my mother. Not because I finally believed she was alive. But because I suddenly understood something I had never allowed myself to consider. She hadn't abandoned me. She had lost me. Just as completely as I had lost her. That evening we returned to my father's house. She hesitated before walking through the front door. I don't know if I should be here. You should. It was your home too. She stepped inside. Everything suddenly became smaller. The hallway. The living room. Even the kitchen. It's strange. She whispered. I remembered it differently. Childhood memories always make places seem bigger. I smiled without thinking. So do happy ones. She looked at me. For the first time. She smiled back. She slowly walked into the kitchen. Her hand rested on the old wooden counter. The table. It's still here. Dad had refused to replace it. Even after one of the legs became uneven. I remembered asking him why. He simply answered. Your mother likes this table. I never questioned it. Now. The answer meant something entirely different. She opened one of the cabinets. Inside sat a faded blue coffee mug. Her coffee mug. She picked it up carefully. I bought this before you were born. She laughed softly. It was ugly. Dad always drank from a different mug. Even after she disappeared. He never touched this one. Not once. As we moved through the house. It became obvious that my father had been preserving memories. Her winter coat still hung inside the hallway closet. The old piano remained exactly where she had left it. Even her favorite cookbook still rested beside the stove. Nothing important had been thrown away. Not because he couldn't move on. Because he refused to believe she was gone forever. We eventually reached the bedroom. She stopped in the doorway. I don't think I can. I understood. I'll go in. You don't have to. She shook her head. No. I owe him this. She walked inside. His side of the bed looked untouched. The reading lamp. His glasses. The old clock on the nightstand. Everything remained exactly as it had the day he died. She sat on the edge of the bed. Then quietly began crying. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just silently. The kind of crying that comes after years of holding everything inside. After a while, I remembered something. Dad kept a locked drawer. What drawer? In his office. He never let anyone open it. She looked surprised. He hated locked drawers. I know. That's why I always wondered. We walked downstairs together. The office smelled exactly the way it always had. Wood. Coffee. Old books. The desk stood beneath the window. The bottom drawer remained locked. I searched through my father's keys. The third one fit. The lock clicked. Inside. There were no bank documents. No valuables. Only letters. Hundreds of them. Neatly tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Every envelope had the same name written across the front. Sarah. My mother's hands began shaking. I picked up the first letter. The date read. October 20th, 6 days after she disappeared. I opened it carefully. The handwriting was unmistakably my father's. Sarah. The police say I should prepare for the worst. I refuse. You'll walk through that front door. You promised Daniel you'd be home for dinner. You always keep your promises. My mother covered her face. I couldn't continue reading. Not yet. There were too many letters. Dozens became hundreds. One every week. Then one every month. Year after year. He had written to her. For nearly 20 years. Even after everyone else had stopped believing. Even after relatives gently suggested he move on. Even after friends stopped asking. He never stopped writing. He just had nowhere to send them. Near the bottom of the drawer lay one final envelope. Unlike the others. It wasn't addressed to my mother. It simply read. For Daniel. I looked at her. She nodded. Read it. With trembling hands. I opened the last letter my father ever wrote. The first line stole the air from my lungs. If you're reading this, then one of two miracles has happened. Either your mother came home. Or you've finally found the courage to stop waiting. Welcome home. For several seconds. I couldn't bring myself to read another word. The room was completely silent. Only the ticking of the old grandfather clock echoed through the house. My mother sat across from me, staring at the envelope as though it had become a doorway to a life she had lost. I finally unfolded the letter. My father's handwriting was steady. Careful. As if he had spent hours choosing every sentence. My dear Daniel. If you're reading this, then one of two miracles has happened. Either your mother finally came home. Or you've finally accepted that she never will. I honestly don't know which one I'm hoping for more. If she's standing beside you right now. Please don't let my absence become another thing that was stolen from our family. I stopped. My mother quietly began crying again. I continued reading. For years people told me to move on. They said she had abandoned us. They said she must have started another life. They said hope was keeping me trapped. They meant well. But every single person who told me that had one thing in common. They didn't know your mother. Another page. Sarah never broke a promise. Especially not one made to her little boy. If she didn't come home. Then something stopped her. I never knew what. Maybe I never will. But I refuse to believe that love simply disappears overnight. I looked toward my mother. She couldn't even lift her head anymore. Every sentence confirmed what she had feared for 2 decades. He had never stopped believing in her. The next page contained something I wasn't prepared for. Daniel. If your mother is alive. She has already suffered more than either of us can imagine. Don't waste your future trying to punish the past. Listen before you judge. Hug her before you ask questions. Love her before time steals another opportunity from you. My hands began shaking. There was one final page. Only a few short paragraphs remained. I spent 20 years writing letters that no one would ever read. Some people would call that foolish. I call it faith. Love isn't measured by whether someone stays beside you every day. Sometimes it's measured by how long you're willing to leave the porch light on. I couldn't stop the tears anymore. The final lines read: "If Sarah comes home, tell her I never blamed her. Tell her she was always enough. Tell her I kept my promise too." I waited. Until the very end. Love always. Michael. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing left to say. 20 years of unanswered questions had been replaced by something even heavier. The truth. My mother slowly reached for the stack of letters. She held them against her chest. I wish I could tell him. I'm sorry. I looked toward the empty chair where my father used to sit every evening after work. He already knows. She looked at me. How can you be sure? I smiled through tears. Because he never stopped believing you'd come back. The following weeks felt unreal. News spread quickly. The missing teacher whose case had remained unsolved for 2 decades had been found alive. Television stations called. Reporters waited outside the house. True crime podcasts wanted interviews. Publishers offered book deals. My mother declined every single one. I've already lost enough years. I don't want to lose the ones I have left. Instead, we focused on ordinary things. The things most families never think twice about. We cooked dinner together. She asked about my childhood. I showed her school photographs. Graduation videos. My first apartment. Pictures of birthdays she had missed. She cried through nearly every album. Sometimes she laughed. Sometimes she apologized. Eventually, she stopped apologizing. Not because she forgot. Because she realized something. The missing years could never be replaced. But they didn't have to define everything that came afterward. One Saturday morning, I found her sitting at the old piano. The same piano she had played before disappearing. She rested her fingers on the keys. I don't think I remember. You do. She smiled nervously. The first notes were hesitant. Uneven. Then, slowly, the melody returned. It was the same lullaby she used to play when I couldn't sleep during thunderstorms. A song I hadn't heard since I was 6 years old. Without realizing it, I began humming along. She stopped playing. How do you still remember it? I smiled. I guess some memories never really disappear. Months passed. The house slowly changed. Not because we were erasing the past. Because we were finally making room for the future. The flowers outside were replaced. The old wallpaper came down. Broken furniture was repaired. For the first time in decades, the house felt alive again. On the anniversary of my father's death, we visited the cemetery together. She carried a bouquet of white lilies. His favorite flowers. We stood silently before the headstone. She knelt down. Placed the flowers beside it. Then whispered. I'm home. The wind moved gently through the trees. Neither of us believed in signs. But at that moment, neither of us felt alone. Before leaving, I took one of my father's letters from my jacket. Not one of the originals. A copy. The final page. I folded it carefully and placed it beneath the flowers. She looked at me. You think he'd like that? I nodded. He spent 20 years trying to send those letters. Now, he finally has. As we walked back toward the car, my mother slipped her arm through mine. The same way she used to when I was a little boy. For a moment. I wasn't 26 anymore. I was 6. Walking beside the woman I thought I had lost forever. Only this time. I knew she wasn't going anywhere. People often ask whether time heals all wounds. I don't think it does. Time changes wounds. It teaches us how to live beside them. Some scars never disappear. But they stop defining every part of who we are. I lost 20 years with my mother. She lost 20 years with her son. My father lost the chance to see his family together again. Nothing could ever return those years. But love isn't measured by the time we lose. It's measured by what survives despite that loss. My father's love survived 20 years of silence. My mother's love survived 20 years of captivity. And somehow, mine survived 20 years of believing I had been abandoned. Today, when people ask about my family, I tell them something simple. My mother came home. Most assume it's a figure of speech. A happy ending. They'll never understand what those 3 words truly mean. Because home isn't always the place you leave. Sometimes, home is the person who finally finds their way back.